very often we think thinking is something that takes us out of the moment. It's not the real thing. It's like the summary. It's the abbreviation, but it isn't, because in that moment, it's very much a live moment of me tracing something and finding what it actually is. It's almost erotic, actually, because it's so sensual.
Welcome to the Holistic Life Navigation Podcast, where we explore life through the lens of somatics. I'm Luis Mujica, a somatic educator who teaches people how to find safety in themselves. Your turn to learn begins now. So I'm welcoming Kat Kruse to the podcast. Welcome, my friend.
Hey, Luis. So good to be here.
Yeah, nice to have you here. I've shared space with you for a while, and you took the course, and you've been in the membership for quite some time. And I learned so much from you all in the membership. It's incredible. I want to get more of you on this podcast. But you've been, I wouldn't say been, but this one time you really brought up this idea of thoughts and the mind. And through this somatic work that we do, it's really easy to kind of center the body and then see thoughts and mind as less than or as a problem or as bad.
Yeah.
So we're going to get into that in a moment. But first, I want you to introduce yourself to the audience. Tell us what you do. Tell us about you. Like, what do you want us to know about you?
Yeah, totally. I'm a somatic coach and a writer. And I think I'll get into what led me to do what I do kind of while we talk about that thing that I call embodied thinking. Maybe it kind of seems to make a lot of sense to take it from there. Yeah, I mean, this conversation came about. Do you remember this situation? It was quite a specific moment on a call where you spoke about, our thoughts being the most impersonal and unoriginal thing. And my body went like, ooh, I don't think so. And so I said kind of, I disagree. And the reason I said I disagree wasn't just because I disagreed, but because, conceptualizing the mind as this alienating thing, like essentially this mean thinking machine, is kind of really part of the problem. And it's part of what keeps us experiencing the mind as such. So that was the whole reason why I even, said something.
I mean, let's just hold that for a moment. I think that's so great. And you're throwing out these great words like embodied thinking. I forgot that you said that. I love that term. And, I think when I experience thoughts as impersonal and unoriginal, I see them as, so Byron Katie has this philosophy of every thought is recycled. Like language, is made from someone else. Statements come from someone else. Like we aren't the originator of statements.
Yeah.
Right. So if I think the thought like no one likes me, that's so not original. That's like such a passed down thought. So what I'm curious about, help me understand, what's the difference between inherited thoughts, statements, ideas, slogans, all these things that we get that we think are ours or we feel them, and this personal, intimate experience you have with thoughts? Like, tell me the difference between those two.
Yeah, totally. To me, it's the difference between the rational mind and that which the mind really is, which is like the creative mind or the wild mind. And to me, it comes down to a misunderstanding that we have about the mind. And this misunderstanding comes from how we experience the mind and our thoughts. And like usually, very often, thoughts are something that we experience as they come to us. They are involuntary, they are automatic, they are racing, they're spinning, we are worrying, we are anticipating with dread. They take us on this horizontal axis, either in the past or in the future. And it's actually that we are being thought rather than that we are thinking. Or there's this hostile voice, that self-relationship that is just, that we call the inner critic, that makes it almost unbearable to have the mind be a place where we can hang out. And so we experience that, and then we say, okay, this is the mind. It's the nature of the mind to create involuntary thoughts. But that's not the nature of the mind. That is the mind under certain circumstances. And so that is the mind when no one's home, essentially.
I feel that. Let's pause there. I love this distinction. Because you're really seeing this similar way that I speak about the body. You're seeing the mind, you know, because the body is this creative, wild, beautiful, ancient creature. And it can also be completely, you know, compressed and constricted and reactive and abusive and all these other things.
Yeah.
I'm hearing the same thing with the mind. Is that correct?
Yeah, totally. And in a way, the mind and the body are always connected in this kind of vertical axis. It's like the body mind, and that is what the wild mind is. But this place where no one's home really means no one's home in two places. No one's home in the body. So we're not thinking with the body, but we're thinking from the body, from stress response or from a trauma response or from a fragmented part of the psyche that takes us over. And no one is home on the conceptual level. And that is where the recycled thoughts come in. You know, if I'm in a paradigm that is the paradigm I'm in, but it's actually not mine, then that paradigm determines the kind of thoughts I can think. My conceptual frames predetermine the kind of thoughts that are even possible. So like that's the mind when no one's home. And that's where the thoughts kind of come from. And so to me, that's not what the mind is, but what the mind is under certain circumstances. And so the thoughts are not so interesting to me because the thoughts are symptoms that I'm actually not there.
I'm just feeling that because I feel that as true, right? I love that. Like when I think about self-inquiry and I think about if I'm noticing, like I said earlier, the thought like no one likes me, what I'm hearing is almost like this dissociated vacancy of this mind space.
Yeah.
These thoughts come in that connect to previous, again, unoriginal, impersonal thoughts that are recycled because they're attached to stress or fear or something they heard someone else say at some point.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're actually embodied in, it's interesting to think about being embodied in the mind, but when you're at home in the mind and that thought comes in, there's this other creative spirit in the mind that can kind of question that thought and relate to that thought and play with it instead of just believing it right away.
I wouldn't even say it's like that. To me, it's different.
Tell
And
me what it's like for you.
yeah, I wouldn't say they come in. I would say, and it's important, like an important distinction to me. I would say they arise. And they arise from a certain state in my body. Like that's the first moment it arises from, and then it has to do with the conceptual frames. But let's take something a bit more drastic. That's okay, right? If I think I'm a loser and I shouldn't live, that thought tells me something about the state my nervous system is in. It means I'm either totally dysregulated, or it means that there's an introject that is super active, which is like a fragmented part of the psyche that I built at a certain developmental stage that kind of carries that belief that this is, you know, disappearing, not living is the best option or the safest option or so. So that thought doesn't enter. It's a logic that has been, you know, formed at a certain stage, and it's being triggered, it's being activated in the moment. And the thought tells me that I basically have what Pete Walker calls an emotional flashback. I'm essentially elsewhere. And so now I'm not questioning that thought. Like, what I would suggest doing is what I find the most helpful to do is to take it as a cue to realize I'm actually not in my body. And I'm also not in the present moment. I'm elsewhere. And so then, you know, rather than staying in this middle ground where I'm looking at the thoughts and dealing with them, I kind of go lower. I go down to the body, and then I go up to my frames. And so it's like being totally embodied and being able to be radically meta, kind of at the same time, or being able to move alongside this axis. because the frame of that thought means I have the frame of I need to, to perform to justify my existence. And very likely that's not a frame I consciously want to hold. It's just one that's still furnishing my mind without being actually very useful. So it's almost like doing Marie Kondo with your mind and kind of sorting out, but not sorting out the thoughts, but sorting out the frames and concepts and paradigms that make the thought the way they are.
I'm loving this reframe because just that simple shift from thoughts entering to thoughts arising, I think that's really important to hold for a moment here. I think there's something in my thinking that is, I don't know if it's trained or a habit of thoughts coming in, like the idea of thoughts entering, but thoughts arising, that's so satisfying, and it's much more in line with how I teach somatics with memory, because like a memory doesn't enter your brain, a memory comes from deep in your tissues. So I'm seeing this as similar, as this thought that comes up is this signal, this like, I've been talking about volcanoes or thinking about volcanoes lately as trauma responses of the earth in this way. This unseen underground place comes out and you can see it. So the thought is like that ash cloud, the volcano, and you can trace it or listen to it or feel into it, and it takes you right into the place in your body from where it emerges. Is that the process of embodied thinking for you? Is that what you mean by it? What would you call that process?
The process to me really is going to the body first. That is kind of similar to what you just described, coming from the tissues. But then if I go to the frames, of course, it's all the debris of the culture. It's like the sediment, it's all the cliches, it's all the stuff that we are fed with like every day. And of course that enters.
And that's what I call unoriginal.
Yes, and it deeply is. And we kind of have it, and almost it's, often it's the first thing that kind of comes. But then, I find this so interesting. Essentially, this is about making the invisible visible, because thoughts are immaterial, but paradigms are even more invisible, because also they're not material, but they're revealed by normalcy. It's the norm is not visible as such per se, because it's that we don't even see anymore. Plus, we don't see it anyway. So, but that is that which lives, which lets the cliches either live in me or not. And so that is why this movement to me is also super important. But yeah, let me maybe go to embodied thinking and kind of speak a bit more about what that experience is, because because in a way thinking is always embodied, because the mind and the conceptual frames, they talk to each other. So the body has conceptual consequences, and concepts have somatic consequences. If I have a very oppressive kind of tight, narrow concept, that will do something to my body in terms of how constricted or how free I feel. And if my body is constricted, it will be difficult to live in a very, very expansive kind of paradigm. So in a way, there already is a conversation. And embodied thinking is just, okay, what happens to your thoughts if you are actually embodied? And you will find that they change their form. So then the experience of the mind, it's less that thoughts are racing and that they are fast and that they are horizontal, but it's more that they are spatial and relational, and a space opens here where things are actually moving slower. And so we have this saying, it hit me, when you have an insight. And it's this, it hit me, and then after it hits you, there's this like, whoa moment of things actually shifting. And it feels as if things are moving around you, your orientation shifts. It can be super disorienting depending on how big the shift actually is.
Mhm.
And what is happening is that if I change one assumption, or especially a paradigm, which is like a meta kind of assumption that everything else rests on, if I change that, then everything else changes its location and its relation, and it's important. Some things fall away, others come up. And we are not thinking that with a rational mind, but we are sensing that with the, with the body mind in a way. That is this feeling of whoa, and then things moving. And that to me is like how we are already thinking in an embodied way when we are like what thinking really is embodied thinking.
I mean, I love that. And I when I hear you talk about that, I notice, for me, in my experience with the body and working with people with it, is the body is always in a relationship with all these states. It's just our awareness of it. So
Yeah.
I think what you're pointing to is that thinking is inherently embodied. It's like, are you noticing it? Are you able to feel the embodiment of your thinking or not?
Yeah, absolutely. And are you able to let your body help you with the thinking?
Right.
Because like let me take an example, which is, if you speak about decolonizing a lot. And to you it's relating instead of dominating. And that could also be a moment where you said it hit me and it really lands. And so it means that that's actually a paradigm shift. It's a quite huge paradigm shift from everything switches from an energy of dominating to an energy of relating. That means everything shifts, every
Mhm.
experience shifts. So now I could be just thinking that, purely cerebrally kind of thinking. This would be massive information to hold. But if I'm feeling into the energetic gesture, like the shift in the energetic gesture of dominating to relating, which is, a stern, vigilant, high tension kind of state, to one that's curious and present, and like me leaning in a little bit, maybe.
Mhm.
And so letting that land means that I let my body sense the differences. So I sense all the places and I sense all the ways in which things are going to be different. So in a way, my body helps me to hold this immense complexity of that paradigm shift, because it knows of all the places that we shift before my conceptual mind even knows all the places. So that's massive. Like the body
Mhm.
really assists the mind in holding complexity. Because if I needed to purely conceptually and rationally hold all these differences, it would be a lot of cerebral activity.
Mhm. Mhm.
So the body is actually assisting the mind in
I love that.
holding complexity.
Yeah, I mean that's something that you'll see in somatic education settings, right? I'll see this all the time in the 6-week course where people are learning through the practices and through titration of material that their bodies have to have the capacity for their mind to even like quote wrap their head around an idea.
Yeah.
And so, because like you're saying, the charge that comes with the amount of activity and charge and excitement that comes with ideas, because again, thoughts and ideas are somatic, as we're speaking here, they're connected. That needs a physical space to be held in and to land in and to even metabolize,
Yeah.
right? So I think that's a really great way of bringing that piece in about how the body can actually become this container for the mind.
It totally is. It's the container, and it's also doing part of the thinking
Mhm.
because it's doing the sensing.
So the sense is really, just to put into different words, the
Mm-hmm.
sensing is like the pre-verbal sensational experience of the idea.
It is, I call them energetic gestures. Basically, they are your adjectives. How are you in the world? Is it curious? Is it closed? Is it curious plus closed? Is it, what is the way in which you move towards something? What is the way you relate to yourself or to others or you are in the world? And each paradigm has an energetic gesture, a way of being in the world, relating to things. And that is that which is sensed. That is one of the things that is sensed. If I would have to think that only, it would totally increase the complexity.
Mm-hmm.
But if the body assists me kind of in sensing that, it's a body language thing. It's as if the internal body language sensor would be also part of the thinking process.
Well, I love that because I always see gestures as thoughts that we're not even aware of,
Yeah.
like when I see someone's shoulder or a tick or, like the way they're like moving, that's a thought being expressed through the body before the mind even has the words to be aware of what that state is.
Totally.
So I think the word
Absolutely.
gesture is really helpful there. I like that you use that.
Yeah. And it's almost like this is integrated, like an integrated thinking, where the subconscious and the conscious are actually kind of working together. And this, in a way, is for me how it came about. That's like the second thing that's interesting to me about embodied thinking is that, we are very often describing something or finding words for something that we've thought, felt, sensed. We kind of know what it is, but we haven't, fully come to an expression of it. So we have thought it, somatically thought it, but now we are giving words to it. We're tracing it with our fingertips, kind of, this process of translation. And very often we think thinking is something that takes us out of the moment. It's not the real thing. It's like the summary. It's the abbreviation, but it isn't, because in that moment, it's very much a live moment of me tracing something and finding what it actually is. It's almost erotic, actually, because it's so sensual. And the way I came to work with it was I studied for like 10 years or so, and then I taught in art school for about a concept and theory, and was mentoring before I became a coach. And when you mentor concepts for like, our graduate students, it's really interesting because you have to find a way for the mind to assist a creative process that is to a large extent kind of unconscious. So the challenge is, how can the mind, the conceptual mind, not be in the way of the subconscious or a creative process? But how can they work together? And I think that's where a lot of that kind of originated from me, thinking about how do they actually play together, and how can I work with concepts in a way where I find to the point of greatest interest, and where I can have a frame for a process, but I'm not harming kind of my creative capacities while I use my mind.
It takes me back to what you were saying earlier about the mind being this creative kind of wild mind.
Yeah.
And in that state, or in those moments, how personal and intimate and new that can be. And where it takes me is, as a musician, when you're sitting in front of, for me, when I'm sitting in front of the piano, there's just 12 notes. There's nothing else. It's always the same 12 notes. And there's this way of playing chords that I've heard other people play. And that's when we're talking about just this metaphor of like unoriginal concepts and the framework and such.
Yeah.
And then there's this kind of felt sense of something wild and new that wants to be expressed through these same 12 notes. And it's this total new creature that's born.
Yeah.
So I love this is good for people listening who are creative, because one thing that trauma does is it's such an interesting experience because in one way, trauma energy is like the most powerful creative energy on the planet that's stuck inside. So it's not like you lack creativity, it's like you lack access to experiencing it all through you in an expressive way. It's like stuck somewhere. And when it gets stuck somewhere, that's when this framework you're talking about comes in, these frames of what society has taught you or you've inherited from your family or past experiences, what I would call overcouplings. They start to come in and they kind of like a vice, around this mind. And they don't really allow for the creativity because that would be more mysterious. And that's mystery is very scary, for
Yeah.
the traumatized system. So I'm wondering, working with us so much in the membership and with the work that I teach and how that meets this work that you teach and practice, how do you have a relationship between the experience of trauma in the body and this more confined mental place? Tell me what that looks like for you or feels like.
Yeah, I mean, to me it's about it's the question, does my animating force, which is the soul, have enough space to move in the vessel that is my body? That's like the central question for me.
Mm-hmm.
And just quickly going back to what you said about improvisation, or it's, am I able to meet the moment without being in the past? Am I able to be fully present and let this and let it take me and take me somewhere? Can I follow an idea without my capacity with being limited, without my ability to hold intensity being limited, without me being tied up by ideas that are limiting, without me having parts of my psyche that are so scared to go to these places that I just don't go there, or I just go there a bit. So basically it's about coming fully into the present so that we can come fully alive.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole somatic part of the work is the foundation, because that to me that's the first movement. If I'm having thoughts that are wildly terrifying, the first movement is down to the body. Can I find safety somewhere? Can I actually be present? Can I hold the turmoil?
Mm-hmm.
Like, all the somatic practices there are like liberatory practices for me, in the sense that they bring me over time in full capacity and in the capacity to actually be in the present moment and not be taken back. And then the conceptual thing really is understanding the frames, understanding, okay, what furnishes my mind? What are the paradigms I'm actually standing within? What is that which would make the system implode if I would do that? What is the place I'm not allowed to inhibit?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you do in somatic coaching, or that's what I do a lot, is that someone else can see that in you more than you can see that in yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Especially, I've worked with that for so long. It's weird. Like, I feel I can sense paradigms, So it's funny to me if people say this is abstract. I'm like, no, it's not to me.
Yeah.
So and especially when it comes together with a somatic, but then also, and that's so key for the creative process, is, do I have that instance, this figure in the psyche, that this thing, person, entity, part of myself that can actually hold the perspective, that can hold the parts when they are activated, that can decide to leave a paradigm, that can decide to come back to the body. So in a way, it's really about strengthening that place in myself,
Mm-hmm.
from where I can, hold that creative process. And that part that is that instance, or that that me inside of me, the self that is strong enough and rooted enough to not be held by paradigms, that I can just float around in the unknown. Because
Wait,
that to me is
pause there. I just really want to feel that with you, because that gives me a lot more information, right? Like the paradigms, what I was saying earlier, the recycled thoughts, the unoriginal ones, those kind of are there to hold what we're afraid to explore elsewhere. It's something known. Even if it's painful, it's something known. And I think that's really important to kind of feel into for a moment, is when this unoriginal recycled paradigm comes in, it's almost like when the bumpers come up in the bowling alley, like it gives you this experience of being held in something, because that vast expansive mystery of creative energy might be super terrifying and kind of too vast for the system.
Yeah. It's a super disorienting moment. And it's actually one that happens to me, that happens in somatic coaching a lot. When someone drops into their felt sense, like this, the sense of the inner body, there can be a moment where just processes are completing, but sometimes it's apparent that there's a shift happening. And felt sense is interesting, because felt sense is felt sensation, but it's also felt meaning. So it's a somatic experience of meaning. So you're there with someone who is hovering, meaning is suspended, and the moment kind of stretches. They're getting uncomfortable because it's like, holy, what's happening here? Lots of things are moving, but we don't really know yet where they're moving to. You, as a person holding it, is also uncomfortable because you're like, where the fuck is this going? What if it goes nowhere? What kind of charlatan are you? That I know what I'm doing, but still it is really uncomfortable. But it's necessary to not prematurely say, oh, it's this, or it means this. Because only then, if we hover long enough and let things rearrange and settle and move, then a new meaning can arise. And that is like the major component of that embodied thinking, is the meaning actually coming from the body and us stepping away long enough so that this new meaning can arise.
I love that so much. I mean, I've had that experience so many times in my body and with people, where you're watching this disintegration of what has always been known and safe.
Yeah.
And you're kind of holding the space with them, and your presence is helping the capacity to do that. I mean, I just, in my mind, I just see shamans with plant medicine. It's like so similar. That's why I always say somatics are like my favorite drug, right? Because they are so psychedelic, because they remove the frames and paradigms, because the meaning that you've inherited that kept you safe dissolves, and then you are just suspended. You literally, your state transforms. I mean, it's a really incredible experience. And I like that you were so transparent as the coach or the practitioner, holding that space, thinking, what the fuck's going to happen? You're a charlatan. You're not doing anything real. Because you are, in a way you are. It's like you're not doing something, quote, real. It's something new. There's no words for it, right?
Yeah, and it's like you're holding these weird energetic dissolvings that are happening. And it is very real, but it's also not very much in the frame that we usually have.
That's right.
And it's interesting to me, words are magic spells in a way, and so if I go to the balcony, if I go high enough, if I go to that which like governs everything else, really to the frames, then I can dissolve something from there. So it's really, one liberatory practice is working with the body, and another one is inventing frames, really radically finding new frames. Because in a way, that dissolving of patterns can come from like both places, but it can't come from this like weird middle distance where you're not really looking and you're not really feeling. But super often we are trying to solve things there.
Yeah.
Nothing new can come from that place.
This is great. And this whole conversation is like a precious example of why it's so important to disagree with people, right?
Hmm.
Because I think it's so easy when you're in spaces with like facilitators or teachers or anyone that's holding space that you're just not supposed to question or disagree. And I'm always saying to everybody, please disagree with me if there's something I say that doesn't resonate. And you
Yeah.
really take me up on that. And I'm so glad because it's like you've opened up more felt sense of this for me than I had an hour ago. And I think it's so good that we get to record this unfurling that's happening for me in real time and for others, who are hearing and feeling this.
Yeah.
I find it so important to revere the mental space as we revere the physical space. Like there are these two sacred spaces that we occupy and live in this lifetime. They are equally they are equally important and precious. And I think that's one thing I'm really taking from this as well.
Yeah. And I mean, in a way, they are one, they are
Yeah.
two, but they are one. And so a big part of the practice is really to be being able to move along that vertical axis. So can I be with the body and be with the words and not be like down and then go up and
Mm-hmm.
leave the body, but can I find a way to be in both places? So without there being a threshold, or without there being a massive separation,
Mm-hmm.
can I, when I'm in the mind, can I find back to the body, and that will change the way I experience my thoughts.
Well, literally, as you're speaking, it's almost like if there was this internal typewriter in my body and the words were just like pressing against certain parts of my ribs and my stomach and like my nervous system. Every time you're speaking a word, I'm just feeling these little blossoms coming from different places in me. And that, to me, that's what you're really talking about is like I'll say how I'm experiencing it is this simultaneous blossoming felt sense in me as it connects to the word and the thought and everything in my mind. It is seamless when
Yeah,
I'm dropped in. It's seamless. When I'm not dropped in, it seems very segregated and separate.
yeah. It's really
Yeah.
beautiful. And also, the way we use words changes. Peter Levine said once that poetry is a window into healing.
Mm.
And to me, it's the way we use words.
Hmm.
Words can be tactile and they have rhythm and they have sound. And they have a somatic echo. And
They
if we
do.
are in the body, then we use language in a different way as well.
That's important. Yeah, that's so important because the way we speak and the tone we speak in and the rhythm we speak in can greatly transform the nervous system of us and someone even in front of us. It's
Yeah.
such a medicine for regulation. And I think when you're feeling the words you're saying, you're having a lived sensational experience of your thinking and your speaking and your ideas. And it's so it is very erotic. Your whole body is kind of just receiving and I don't know, for me it's always like these vines, these really sensational vines wrapping around all these parts of my body as I speak and listen. And
Yeah.
it's super intimate.
It is, and it's also weird how there's this basic joy to things that are very foundational, to
Mm,
breathing, to moving, to speaking, to sounding, where they can become so massively wonderful and joyous. And it's actually also about that. It's a very frugal thing where you suddenly,
mm,
have access to the most basic thing that we very often lose.
that's right.
Aliveness, joy, exuberance, the filling out of all the spaces. And that, in a way, to me, you said capacity is the cosmic parent in one of the last in one of the last sessions. And to me, it's almost like inventing frames is the other
Mm,
cosmic parent, super parent,
mhm, mhm.
But do I have the space in my mind to actually play freely, as much as I have the space in my body to be large and expand my joy and my life force?
It's a great question. And I think that analogy or metaphor of the parent is so good, because a frame is a parent. It's this boundary because you can't handle something beyond the frame in that moment, or at least you think you can. And then when that capacity comes in, I guess I think I said that because when I have a large amount of capacity or a deep capacity, that conscious mind is so accessible. And so any thought that enters, any experience I go through with someone, whether it's really horrible or really great, there's this capacity to receive it. And then that conscious mind is like this excellent friend and parent that helps when something does come up.
Yeah.
And creativity, unfurls from that so much more easily.
Yeah, totally. And in a way, inventing frames is a kind of reparenting, because it's attune them, it's like, what would excite you?
Mm-hmm.
What about this excites you? What can you make this about that would actually bring out your life force?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
What do you need? What would excite you? And not titillate, coax out of boredom excitement, but, bring you alive.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing you would do to a child. This child needs something else, and that child. And do I even know what I need on that basic, fundamental aliveness level?
So I feel like I'm in this warm bath with you and I don't want to get out, but I have to. It's like so gooey. Can you tell us how to find you? How can people work with you? Where can they find your work?
Yeah. I do one-on-one sessions. I have a website, katrinekruse.com. I have a quite deserted Instagram that is Artists of Self that needs a little bit more love. But the best way really to find me and to contact me is via email, via my website. And I have a coaching practice.
Well, we'll put that info in the show link in the details. Thank you, my friend. This is just such a beautiful, really body opening conversation for me. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Liz.
That's the end of today's episode. Now let's take a moment to notice where we feel the episode in our bodies. Close your eyes. Take a breath. And let whatever wants to come up, come up. And remember, those sensations hold the wisdom that we're looking for. If you want to go deeper, visit holisticlifenavigation.com.